I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, my hands fumbling with the delicate straps of my summer dress. The late afternoon sun poured through the blinds, streaking through 'em with golden light, but my mind was elsewhere. I had just finished setting the table for dinner, waiting for him to come inside from the garden where he was fixing the broken trellis a Corried had taken on without me even asking, aside pulling one strap back over Miss Holder, while adjusting my bra underneath my fingers, though nimble in most situations felt clumsy as I wrestled with the small clasp. Then, just as I thought I had it, the KN securing my other strap came undone. The dress lipped, and for a fleeting moment I stood frozen in surprise, staring at my reflection as the fabric pulled at my waist, leaving me in nothing but lace and the glow of the sun. It was in that moment, just as I reached to pull the dress back up, that I heard it. A soft knock on the door frame. "Dinner, smell amazing. Do you need?" I turned sharply, clutching the dress against me. There he stood, my stepson, framed by the doorway, his gaze lingering for a second too long before he realized and quickly turned his head. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice tight and hurried, like he'd forgotten to breathe. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine." I cut him off, though the heat rising to my cheeks betrayed my calm tone. "The door must have been ajar," he nodded, backing away, as if the air between us had grown too charged. High sighs flickering up once, meeting mine, for he disappeared down the hall. I stood there for a moment, gripping the fabric of my dress and staring at the empty doorway, my heart pounding in a way that felt both foreign and familiar. I'm 52, a widow for nearly 5 years now, living in this sprawling house that feels too big and too quiet for just me. My late husband Bill left me with everything I needed: comfort, security, the kind of life most people dream of. But he also left me with an emptiness I hadn't anticipated, that seemed to echo in every room and every mundane task. Then there's Adam, Bill's son from his first marriage. He's 27 now, tall, with a quiet confidence that's both endearing and maddening. When Bill passed, Adam had insisted on staying in my life. "Family doesn't just stop," he had said at the funeral, his hand warm on mine, his grief mirroring my own. Over the years he's been my lifeline in ways I didn't expect. Comes over to help with the things Bill would have done, fixing the fence, clearing the gutters, carrying heavy boxes up from the basement. We've fallen into an easy rhythm, one where his company feels more like a balm for loneliness. I try so hard to hide, but lately I've noticed something. It's in the way his eyes linger a second too long when I hand him a glass of iced tea, the way he stands a little closer than necessary when we're looking over some old family photo albums. I've tried to dismiss it as my imagination chalking it up to the way grief plays tricks on a lonely heart. But after what just happened, after the way his voice hitched and his cheeks flushed, I'm not so sure anymore. That night at dinner, the air between us was thick with something unspoken. He sat across from me, his sleeves rolled up his tan forearms, rousing casually on the edge of the table as he complimented the roast chicken I had made. I smiled, nodding Atha's words, but I couldn't focus. All I could think about was the moment in theater way, the way his eyes had widened bare. He quickly looked away, like he'd seen something he shouldn't have, like you and to look longer, but knew heckled in. The thing is, I wasn't angry. I should have been, shouldn't. I should have felt outraged or embarrassed or something closer to the kind of indignation a woman in my position is supposed to feel. But instead there was a strange, unwelcome heat curling in my chest, spreading to places I hadn't thought about in years. As I sipped my wine, I caught him glancing at me, high sighs dropping quickly to his plate. Weenie met his gaze. For the first time I felt something shifted. Wasn't just me noticing him, it was him noticing me. After dinner he offered to wash the dishes. I watched him from the living room, the steady rhythm of water running, gand plates clinking, lulling me into a trance. His broad shoulders moved under his t-shirt as he leaned forward over sink, and for a moment I forget myself. I forgot that I'm the woman who raised him. I forgot the decades between us. I forgot that this was wrong. When he turned off the faucet and looked over ATM, His lips iffled my heart stutter, and I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The following morning, I stood in the kitchen pouring coffee into my favorite ceramic mug. When merge I heard the sound off back door creaking open. Adam Waserly. Clock hadn't even struck 9, and the sunlight was still soft and golden, stretching lazily across the hardwood floor. Morning, he called out, his voice slightly hoarse, carrying the timbre of Samain, who hadn't quite shaken off sleep. I glanced over my shoulder, catching sight of him standing in theater way. His hair was tousled, his t-shirt snug against his chest, and he held a toolbox in one hand. Morning, I replied, my voice steady, even though my pulse quickened. You rarely thought I'd get started on the back fence before it gets too hot. Hesed. Stepping inside, his presence filled the room, the faint scent of earth and pine clinging to him. Coffee? I asked, holding up the pot. He smiled, that lopsided grin that always seemed to disarm me. Sure, black, please. As I handed him the mug, his fingers brushed mine just for a second, but long enough to send a ripple of awareness through me. I looked up, and our eyes met. It was fleeting, that moment, but it lingered in the charged air between us. The day unfolded in fragments of moments like that. Later, as I stood on the porch watching him hammer nails into the fence, I found myself studying him, his broad shoulders, the way his muscles flexed. Ash worked, the streak of sweat glistening at his temple. I scolded myself for allowing my mind to wander where it shouldn't. But it was hard. Toinier, the way he buried himself, that quiet confidence that seemed to emanate from him. At one point, he glanced back over his shoulder and caught me stringy, quickly turned away, pretending to adjust the hem of my sundress, but my heart thudded against my ribs when he finished. I brought out a picture of lemonade. He sat on the porch steps, hissered damp and clinging to his skin. Andy joined him, handing him a glass. Looks like you fixed it, I said, nodding toward the fence only because I had such a good excuse to come over. He replied, his tone playful, but his eyes searching mine. Elod softly, but his words lingered. I could feel the weight of them. Though unspoken, meaning hanging in the air. That night, I found myself tossing and turning in bed, my mind replaying every interaction. From the day his voice hissed, the way his eyes had lingered on, it all felt too vivid, too real. Toinier. I tried to convince myself that it was harmless, that it was all in my head. But deep down I knew better. A few days later, he stopped. I thought I'd take a look at the deck, he said, standing in the doorway with that familiar toolbox in hand. The deck didn't need fixing. I knew it, and I was pretty sure he did too, but I stepped it aside, letting him in as he worked. I brought out a tray of iced tea. The summer heat was oppressive, and the cool drink was a welcome reprieve. He thanked me, taking a long sip, and then leaned against the railing, his gaze drifting toward me. You know, he began, his voice low, I think this is the first summer I've really spent time here with you, Iman. I smiled, feeling a warmth bloom in me chest. I'm glad you're here, Adam. I really am. His eyes softened, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Over the next few weeks, his visits became more frequent. Heffened reasons to be around, fixing a squeaky door hinge, replacing a light bulb, trimming the hedges in the garden. Each time our conversations grew deeper, more personal. He told me about his childhood, about how he used to resent his father for remarrying so quickly after his mother left. But then he smiled, looking at me. It didn't take long for me to realize how lucky he was to have found you. His words caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. But then he reached out, his hand brushing mine, and everything else seemed meant to. The porch swing, a bottle of wine between us. The conversation was light, at first memories of Bill's stories of Buddha college days, but as the wine flowed, so did the words we'd both been holding back. I never told you this, hissed his voice, barely above a whisper, but after Dad passed, I didn't just come around to help you. I came because I needed to be here with you. His hung in the air, heavy and indeniable. My breath hitched, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Adam, I began, but he shook his head, cutting me off. I know it's wrong, he said, his eyes searching mine. I know how this looks, but I can't ignore what I feel. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon. He had come over to bring me a new garden hose, but the weather had taken a sudden turn, leaving us stranded indoors. The rain battered against the windows, the gray light casting long shadows across the living room. We sat on the couch, a movie playing softly in the background. I couldn't tell you what it was. We weren't paying attention. I've been thinking, Hesed, breaking the silence, about what he asked, my voice quieter than I intended. About us. My heart skipped a beat. Adam, we can't, I began, but he reached out, his fingers brushing against mine. Why not, he asked, his voice steady, his gazoon wavering. We're not hurting anyone, it's justice here in this moment. Why can't we have that? His words sent a shiver down me spine. I wanted to argue, to push him away, but the truth was, I couldn't. Best deep down, I wanted it too. Before I could say anything, he leaned and hissed, cupping my face as his lips brushed against mine. It was soft at first, tentative, as if he were waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. The kiss deepened, and for a moment the world fell away. There was no rain, no judgment, no past or future. There was only us. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath warm against my skin. I'm sorry, he whispered. I couldn't help myself. I shook my head, my hands trembling as they rested against his chest. Don't be. We sat there for a long time, the rain continuing its relentless saw on the world outside. Neither of us spoke, but the silence was filled with an understanding that didn't need words. The time the rain stopped, something between us had shifted. There was no going back now. The next evening, Adam came over again. Unannounced, it was unusual even for him. I'd barely had to process what had happened between us days day before, and seeing him on the perch, a determined look in his eyes, Madame, pulse quicken. I needed to see you, Hesed simply, his voice steady yet edged with something raw. I hesitated, my hand lingering on the doorframe. Adam, maybe you should talk about. He stepped closer, closing the space between us. We've been to, haven't we, for weeks, for 4 months? And I think we both know where this is going. I wanted to argue, to push him away, to tell him this was wrong, but as I stood there, his words hung in the air, innuble and heavy with truth. Let Maine, he said softly. His tone wasn't commanding, it was pleading, and I found myself stepping aside, letting him in, not just through the door, but into the guarded part of my heart I tried to keep locked away. We ended up in the living room. The room that once felt so large and empty now seemed smaller. Fear, thick with unspoken tension. He sat on the edge of the couch, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. I know this isn't easy for you, he began, his voice low, but I can't keep pretending that what I feel isn't real, and I don't think you can either, Adam, I whispered, but the words got stuck in my throat. He stood, closing the distance between us. His hand reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. The gesture was so tender, so intimate, it left me breathless. Beautiful, he said, his voice barely audible. Before I could stop myself, I leaned to his touch, and then just like that, the dam broke. His lips met mine in a kiss that was anything but hesitant. It was slow, deliberate, and full of everything we'd left unsaid. His hands rested lightly on my hips, not demanding but holding me in place, as though afraid he might vanish if he let go. When we pulled apart, my breath came in shallow gasps, my mind embracing with everything. This was a mistake. But then it looked into his eyes, soft, earnest, and brimming with a kind of emotion I had seen in years. I don't want to stop, Hesed, his voice steady, and neither did I. Moved to the couch, the world outside fading away, the hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath us were the only sounds. He kissed me again, deeper this time, his hand sliding up my arms, his stouch igniting a warmth that spread through me like wildfire. I broke the keys, my forehead resting against his ace. The whispered, "This is crazy," maybe hair plied, his fingers tracing slouty liberate patterns on my back. But it feels right. There was no denying that it did feel right to write his hands. Moved lower, gripping my waist as he pulled me closer. I let out a soft gasp, my body beat. The caution my mind tried to impose. My hands found their way to Hish's, feeling the steady rhythm of Hisha beat beneath my fingertips. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice strained, high sighs searching mine. I couldn't. Instead, I leaned in, pressing my lips to his in a kiss that was both an answer and a surrender. The next few moments blurred together, the soft brush of his fingertips against my skin, the way his lips found every place that made me shiver, the quiet whispers of reassurance eached. In the dim light of the room, it all felt surreal, like a dream. I never wanted to wake from. Time seemed Taslow, as we gave in to the pull that had been building for so long. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word felt like a piece of a puzzle. Finally, falling into place when it was over, we lay together on the couch, the room bathed in soft glow of the lamp, his arm draped loosely around my waist, and I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady rise and fall of his breath. "I didn't regret this," he said, quietly breaking the silence. I looked up at him, my heart aching with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "Do I admitted the words, feeling both liberating and terrifying. But as the quiet settled around us, reality began to creep back in. What we had done couldn't be undone. And while Ethod felt right in the moment, I couldn't ignore the questions swirling in my mind. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He tightened his hold on my thumb, tracing lazy circles on my hip. "We figure it out together." His confidence was reassuring, but I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were boundaries we had crossed, lines we couldn't pretend didn't exist. But for the first time in years, I felt alive. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long golden streaks. The living room floor, I sat on the edge of the couch, still wrapped in the blanket he'd pulled over me during the night. The room was silent now, save for the faint chirping of birds outside, but my mind was anything but quiet. Adlin, before sunrise, pressing a lingering kiss to my forehead and promising we'd talk soon. I watched Dem walk out the door, his figure dissolving into the soft haze of dawn, and with him went the temporary euphoria of the night before. Now, in the light after, reality loomed large and unrelenting. Traced my fingers over the curve-off mug in my hands, the coffee in city growing cold. My thoughts were entangled me, swinging wildly between the tenderness of his touch and the weight of what we had done. I had crossed a line I'd spent years trying to define and respect, and yet I couldn't bring myself to regret it. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I had felt truly seen, truly wanted. Adam had looked at me not as Simeon. He was obligated to care for Boot. A woman with desires, fears and longings that had been buried under layers of grief and routine. But what no thought question hung over me, like a shadow, its answer as elusive as sleep had been the night before. I couldn't ignore the of what had happened, the whispers of self-doubt and judgment gnawed at the edges of my mind. I thought of the life Bill and I had built together, memories that still lived in every corner of this house. What would he think of me now? And Adam, what would this mean for him, for us? I placed the mug down on the table, my hands trembling. The path forward wasn't clear, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same. A week passed before I saw Adam again. I had spent those days oscillating between moments of clarity and waves of doubt. I kept busy gardening, reorganizing the attic, even repainting the guest bedroom, anything to keep my mind from drifting back to that night. But no amount of distraction could erase the memory of his touch, the quiet intensity. In high sighs, the way his voice had softened when he said my name, when he finally showed up on the porch. That Saturday morning, my heart leaped and sank all a tones. He looked different, calmer, more assured, but there was a tension in his shoulders that betrayed the weight of whatever he'd come to say. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me," he admitted, standing there with his hands stuffed into his pockets. I gestured for him to come in, my voice steady despite the flurry of emotions swirling inside me. "Of course, I want to see you stepped inside, and for a moment we just stood there, the silence between a Shivi, but no tongue comfortable. Finally, he spoke. I've thought about that night, about us every day since it happened, he said, his word, scareful but firm. I know. It's complicated, I know it's not what anyone would expect, but I can't ignore how I feel about you. I don't want to. His honus taked my breath away. I'd spent so much time second-guessing myself, imagining very possible consequence, that I hadn't allowed myself to truly consider what it would mean to embrace this, to embrace him. I'm scared, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. So am I, he replied, stepping closer, but I'd rather scared with you than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. His words hung in the air, and in that moment, something inside me shifted us. I walked him to the door later. He posed, his hand resting on the door. Nob, come with me, he said, suddenly turning to face. Me come with you, where? I asked, startled. Anywhere, he said simply, his eyes holding mine. Just let and leave all this behind. Start fresh together. I hesitated, my mind racing with questions and doubts, but when I looked at him standing there with hope in his eyes and a quiet resolve in his voice, I felt the tiniest flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. I'll think about it, I said finally, my lips curving into a uncertain smile. And as he walked away, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter I hadn't even dared to dream of.